Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer and winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's captured a serial killer. Now, 40 years in law enforcement adds a little bit to the puzzle. So this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on all of your podcast platforms, well, she joins me, and together we take you on a journey of profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Well, enjoying one of our award-winning Casaro Winery wines. And today I've got our True Crime and Wine Red Blend. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but go ahead and grab yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for our podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, make sure you share us with all of those true crime lovers out there, your friends and your family. Now, in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Israel Keys, a methodical serial killer who traveled the country in search for his victims and to cover up his crimes. But was he really a serial killer, or just someone that wanted attention and claimed that he committed more crimes than he actually did? I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a unique case that people have been asking me to cover for a very long time in our True Crime and Wine live shows. But I've always resisted because I got to tell you, I'm not convinced Israel Keys was a real serial killer, especially in the strict definition. Did he kill 3 or more people? Was it in a similar manner? Was there a cooling off period in between? Can one reasonably assume that all the murders were connected? Now, I know we had kill kits, but we only found 2 of them. And I know he confessed to a ton of murders, but unfortunately, most of them, the majority, can't be verified. What do you think?
Well, I want to say I'm glad we're doing this case because you and I talked about the name Israel Keys and how people know about it. They've wanted you to cover it. And I have always felt that he was a serial killer. And then you and I kind of talked about, what qualifies someone as a serial killer. Can any of this other information be verified? So I'm very excited to run this with you and your profiling and see why you think this could possibly be the case.
All right, and let's get started, Brandy.
Okay, John. So as we get into talking about Israel Keys and the crimes he committed, we always want to talk about the early life of these serial killers and where they come from, their religion, their schooling, what it was like to be with other kids. But we know he came from a very large family. He was actually the second child of 10 children to both Heidi and John Jeffrey Keys. I think when you have this many kids, there can be certain aspects of not getting the attention or the upbringing that you should. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But something that really stuck out with me was the constant change of uncertainty in the religion. He was raised in a very strict fundamentalist Christian parent. He had Christian parents who were very religious. They rejected modern society. They rejected government, modern medicine. They were part of the Latter-day Saints Church. They were members, but then he had left for a white supremacist group, like Christian Identity. And then they moved to an isolated cabin with no electricity, no water, not part of modern society. So as someone who's thinking about being the second of 10 children, having parents being, it kind of reminds me of a cult-like system right? And they believe in one thing, they're teaching their kids this, and then they're being moved around, being taught different fundamentalists of Christianity. And I can see confusion, John. I can see in the young child how this can be very confusing.
Yeah, and again, in law enforcement, we look at that totality of circumstances. So, these things in themselves, are they significant? But from a religious, a cultural, and upbringing, if you're being raised and your kind of values and culture are constantly changing, that's got to be stressful. That's got to be difficult on children who are trying to say, what's right, what's wrong, what are my values, what are my morals, but then becoming isolated, moving to a cabin in the woods with no running water, no electricity. Now we're almost starting to get into some of the red flags we saw with other serial killers, right?
Right.
The isolation, the loneliness, the poverty. Now this might have been self-inflicted, so not like some of the other killers we talked about that grew up in abject poverty, but if your parents are rejecting government and medicine and moving you to an isolated area, a cabin, with no modern conveniences, it's going to have an impact on you. And one of the things that we do know about Israel Keys is that in addition to that, he was also homeschooled. So I kind of see this as isolation on top of isolation on top of isolation. He was forced to hunt, right, to help out with
Mm-hmm.
the food for the family, to chop wood, to farm. He lived in a tent at times. Um, the religious throughout his young life, religious confusion, let's say, continued because he attended multiple churches with his family, but they were almost militia-like or
Okay.
cult-like you said. And unfortunately, he had no formal education other than what he received being homeschooled. So we can already start to see, and the reason that, like you said, we look at the early life of these offenders is we want to try to see, are there patterns, are there commonalities, are there things that we can pull out as we start researching these serial killers and figuring out who is committing these crimes. So I'm seeing a lot of isolation here, a lot of confusion with religion, a
Mhm.
lot of loneliness, and quite frankly, a lot of hard times.
Well, and I also think from just being a child, right? I mean, first of all, you have 10 children. I mean, I don't know all the ages of all of the siblings at this point, but let's say you're teaching half of them homeschooling. I mean, what kind of really education and time can you be spending on that, especially when they are so focused on the church and instilling this in their family? I mean, everything it seems like every kind of decision the parents are making for their kids is revolved around religion. And so, and then isolating them. And then you see other kids and other peers having fun, doing social behavior things, right? And so I do think that just creates this, yin and yang of the mind of a young child who wants to be out and about and then, being forced to be isolated.
Yeah, and I think you start to see some of those antisocial behaviors at a very early age. He started to torture animals, reportedly skinned some alive.
Mm,
He shot a cat, tied it to a tree. Apparently skinned a deer alive. So, animal
mm,
abuse, animal torture is one of those red
yeah.
flags. It's certainly not some predetermining factor, but it is one of those red flags. We know that he was also involved in some home burglaries, that he stole some weapons. So maybe some of that was being forced to live in a tent, live in a cabin,
Yeah.
no running water, no electricity. Hey, we got to fend for ourselves. We got to survive.
Yeah.
So maybe
Survival
some
mode.
Right. Maybe some
Yeah.
of that was survival mode. But we also know that he did start fires. He was ostracized by his peers. And I thought that was interesting because what peers did he have? Were they comparing him to other children in the church? Well, quite frankly, they could have been going to church with other children. Maybe that was his socialization, but they lived in homes. They had
Yeah.
electricity. They had water. They didn't have to scramble for food. And so, like a lot of the other serial killers we've covered, like the pig farmer, maybe the way he dressed, maybe his attire, maybe he had dirt or blood on his clothes. All of
Yeah.
those things really, really add up. And
Yeah.
he says that from like age 14, he was already having very, very antisocial and violent thoughts.
Well, I go back to breaking into the homes, right? Fires, guns, and then I don't know enough about, the church he was raised in, or what those feelings and thoughts were about these types of things, right? You have a lot of people of faith who believe you shouldn't be breaking into homes and stealing guns and starting fires. And so is this what we're seeing of like the bad versus the good? I don't know enough right now. We haven't talked about his parents enough. I don't know if we're going to, I don't know how much we're going to get into them, but it's like the behaviors are starting to show. He's self-aware of violence. And so I don't know, you're dealing with the survival mode of a child who is doing these things, but then being raised in a very strict church-like atmosphere. And I don't know. It's hard
I
to tell right now.
I think they're all precursors, right, Brandy? If as a
Yeah.
child you torture animals and no one tells you it's wrong, and you
Okay.
start fires and no one tells you it's wrong, and then you break into somebody else's house and you steal weapons, and again nobody tells you it's wrong, or there are no punishments for
Mhm.
any of that. To me, this is exactly what we're looking at in law enforcement. What were those
Yeah.
precursors? How did it start? Were there any rules or expectations of normalized behavior? Or was it simply do what you want when you want and with whatever you can get away with? So that's kind of how
Interesting.
I view this.
Well, we know he was a tall guy, 6'2". He could use his hands well. He was a skilled carpenter. He built a cabin at 16 years old. Impressive.
Yep.
Worked for a contractor for a couple of years. Now the family moves to Oregon and then Maine and into the Amish community. So are they now shifting again, John, in their religious beliefs?
Yeah, that's what I think is I've looked at this, and they had started with one community. They then moved to another, then a third, then a fourth. In his very early years, now we see as a teenager, they're entering an Amish community. He doesn't like that at all. He kind of renounced his faith. He then said, I'm going to be an atheist, and didn't enjoy that. He then explored, Satanism. So to me, this is all that spiritual, cultural, religious conflict that is now manifesting in this teenager, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it started at a very early age. I mean, literally, his entire life has been some type of uh, religious, cultural experience
Mhm.
that was taken to the extreme. And he even said that throughout the rest of his life, he struggled with his religious identity, and
Yeah.
as a young teenager thought about, now how many young teenagers think about this, ritual murder.
Mm.
I mean, that is not the norm. So, as we
Yeah.
start looking at all of these precursors and all of these red flags, right? I've told you before, I've got this little checklist in my head. When departments contact me, I'm going through the checklist, right? I'm marking the boxes. Did he have abusive parents? I don't know if you call them abusive, but certainly there was a lot of conflict with their religious beliefs. We know that. So I'm not sure that's one that you maybe have check mark the box. We don't know about mental health issues at this point, or traumatic brain injury, which are precursors. We did know he had a big growing spurt. That's not abnormal though. So that might have also kind of kept him as a loner and ostracized when you combine that with living out there on your own, living in a tent, that type thing. Um, we're not really sure about his intelligence level, other than we know he was only homeschooled. We do know, however, that he was a loner, that he did abuse animals, that he did petty crimes and even more. I don't ever consider burglary a petty crime, right? Theft,
Right.
stealing somebody's pencils off their desk is one thing. Breaking into a home, stealing weapons, that's a totally another level. And we know that he did that, so we can check that box. We know that he started fires. But to me, the thing that really stuck out to me when I was going back and looking at some of his not only crimes but his early life was, I think we saw this in maybe Keith Jefferson torturing the kittens in front of his daughter,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so another level beyond abuse and a torture. And seeing his desire to skin animals alive,
Mm.
that that really stuck out to me. That really stuck out to me. That's a different level. Just like Jefferson doing that in front of his young daughter,
Yeah.
traumatizing her, hurting, killing the animal. Skinning an animal alive is a different level.
Well, because you can hear the cries, right? You can
Yeah.
hear the pain. You can see it in the eyes, right? Or the face, or have a reaction to the torture and the pain you're inflicting. But that's very I never really thought about what you said about
But
skinning them alive. It really
yeah,
does take it to a totally different level.
I can remember taking my young daughter up to Colorado. We were trout fishing, and had a guide with us. We had caught a trout, and the guide gets a hammer
Oh
and
gosh.
hits the trout with the hammer to kill it. Because usually, when I'm fishing, we put them on stringers, keep them alive until
Sure.
we're ready to take them home and everything. And my daughter said, why is he gonna hit him in the head with a hammer? And he said, oh, to make sure they don't suffer. And she was like 4 or 5 years old. She goes, doesn't hitting him in the head with a hammer make him suffer?
Suffer.
I just thought it was a good point. But isn't
Smart.
that a natural reaction, right? From a
Yeah,
child. I don't want
that's
an
right.
animal to hurt. I
That's
don't
right.
want an animal to. So to me, when we start weighing
Hmm.
natural morals and values and
Empathy.
culture, yeah,
Empathy.
empathy for the animal,
That's right.
you don't have it. And again, one of these big characteristics, big red flags, when we start seeing no empathy and no remorse, that's a
Yeah.
huge red flag.
All right, John. So we know that his first known crime was around 1997, 1998. This crime was a sexual assault of a teenage girl between the ages of 14 to 18 on a river in Oregon. Now, he did say he intended to kill, but released her and later regretted actually not being violent enough with her. What do you think about just this first early crime? I want to stop there and just get your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a sexual assault. Maybe that comes from him again being a loner, being isolated, not having normal relations. He finds this young teenager, sexually assaults her. But again, the thing that sticks out to me is he even regretted letting her go. He
Right.
thought, I needed to be more violent. I needed to kill her. For most serial killers, I don't think it's a matter of, I don't want to leave a witness. I think it's
Uh-huh.
a matter of, I want to see what it feels like when I kill somebody. And this may sound weird, Brandy, but I've seen this with other people, not just serial killers. I was actually working the street one time, got a call about a shooting, and it was not far from me, like less than a block. I was there in a split second, pulled up, jumped out, and there's a little kid. I mean, little skinny kid, 14. And he's standing there right in front of the dead body with the gun in his hand. And I
Oh,
said, I drew down on him and everything, freeze, police, all that, and get the gun away from him. And I'm like, what did you do? And he said, well, I just shot him. And I said, why? And he said, I just wanted to see what it'd be like to kill somebody.
Ugh.
So I've actually had this happen personally with me. Absolutely amazing. But unfortunately, there are people out there like that. This little 14-year-old kid said, I just wanted to see. And I think with some of these serial killers, and we've seen this before, we saw this with a big game hunter, I'm not leaving witnesses again, right?
Right.
And I don't think they're really talking about the witness or somebody testifying them. I think they're talking about, I went too easy on him. I was too nice. I should have killed him. Or in this case, probably, I wanted to see what it's like to kill somebody. I just didn't have the guts to do it right then.
Well, and also not violent enough tells me, like you were talking about skinning the animal alive, right? Maybe not enough violence, maybe not enough
Torture.
Torture, not enough whatever that satisfaction is in him to satisfy it wasn't satisfied enough. Which is interesting to think about after you've committed a crime like this. But we know heavy drinking. He was a heavy drinker. He had.
So we've seen that pendulum shift, right?
Yep.
Parents didn't drink, strict, Christian, religious. Yep. Now we've seen the child. How many times we've seen this? They go the exact opposite direction.
Yeah. So a drinker, right? Into, metal music, which I don't know, John, maybe we need to have like some sort of a talk one time about movies and music, because I know there are a lot of parents who keep their kids away from certain things at certain ages because of maybe the words of songs, maybe the things they can see. But there are liberal people I really know, my father being one of them. I remember watching Jaws when I was like 5 years old. But I loved movies and grew up loving that, right? And appreciated cinema. And so I don't know. Is it the chemistry we talk about as a child, John, right? The nurture versus, and is it, can someone at a young age be exposed to these things and not be killers later on in their life?
Well, I think, of course. I mean, this kind of came up over the last couple of decades with school shooters and their crimes. Were they related to video games? And
Okay.
I'd say all the time in interviews, playing a video game does not make somebody a serial killer. That does not strip you of your empathy and your feelings for remorse. It doesn't strip you of your morals and your values and your ethics. You're playing a game, especially if you realize you're playing a game. But we do see that some of these serial killers at least say part of the influence came from a movie that they watched, right? Or music they listened to or whatever. Does that make him a serial killer? No, because there's so many more aspects to it. But again, looking at the totality of the circumstances, he's raping this girl. He says he wished he'd kill her. He's drinking heavily now. So we're starting to see this kid grow into a man, and it's a very, very scary man at this point.
I want to talk a little bit about his military career, but before we go there, I want to talk about the journal. So he journaled sins that he was committing with biblical quotes. Again, I see this yin and yang of like the devil in me on paper versus like, let me write down the Christianity of what I'm doing. I mean, thoughts there.
I see this conflict. Yeah, I said from a very early age, we see this, and I can't even imagine. I grew up with one religion and have practiced it all my life. And at different times, you question different things. But can you imagine being pulled between this really strict religion and then this really strict and then this really strict, and then you're an atheist and now you're going back to this? It to me is just a hodgepodge of conflict. And I think it's manifested with him in his journal, because you see the biblical entries. Like, I know what the Bible says. I was raised with, I study it, but I also know what these feelings are inside of me. And they are totally opposite.
And again, it's your upbringing, John, right? It's his upbringing, and it's this constant mental battle, like you said, just this, and going into teenage years and young adult years, and he admits his entire life he struggled with this, this religious
conflict. Yep.
All right. So July 9th, 1998, he enlists into the Army. He becomes a specialist in the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, stationed at Fort Lewis, Fort Hood. He went to Egypt, completed Ranger training. He was awarded an Achievement Medal. What do we know about his military career?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot, except it did come out at one point, and I think that was during his string of confessions, that he did sexually assault women when he was overseas, and according to him, in both Egypt and Israel. So that would show a continuation. And we've seen this with a lot of these guys we look at, Brandy. They're looking for some port in the storm, right? They're looking for some structure. They're searching, and they go to the military. And many of them just don't find it, right? They just don't find it. His heavy drinking continues. There's no other reported crimes that we know of except him admitting to these sexually assaults. And he's honorably discharged in 2001.
So he's joined the military. He's now an adult. So after he's discharged, he moves to Washington. He lives on a reservation. He worked for the tribal council for about 6 years, 2001 to 2007. He meets a girl. He meets her online. They end up having a daughter, but then breaking up later. And then he moves to Alaska. In 2007, he relocates to Anchorage with his daughter and new girlfriend, who is a nurse. So again, John, you see, join the military. Now you're discharged. Now you're starting a family, having a relationship, having a child. He did suffer, I think, from depression. He did have suicidal thoughts. That relationship with Kimberly eventually ends. But what are you picking up when it comes from a profiling perspective?
I think he's struggling, struggling with going from troubled teenager to, a semi-normal military career, but behind the scene crimes. And we've certainly saw that before. And then he's searching for a relationship. And, getting out, getting a job, stabilizing a little bit with his girlfriend. I think raising the child, that might have helped during that point a little bit. And then starting his own construction company. Those skills that he learned as a young teenager and throughout his young years, he started putting to use. And people even said he was a very trustworthy handyman. And he started acquiring money through his construction company, and had property in both Washington and New York State. But still, he's experiencing these conflicts, these inner conflicts, these thoughts of suicide. And I think breaking up with Kimberly, his girlfriend, may have been really, really stressful. I think that maybe took away any sense of normalcy. But he did, we see, have a degree of empathy for his daughter because he tried to protect his daughter from his crimes and knowing about the crimes. And even, all the way up to the end, we saw that he at least had some sliver of feelings and emotions and paternal instinct, I guess, for his daughter.
We've seen that in other cases, I think, too. And I don't know if it's just, a relationship with a woman is different than a relationship with your child.
Right.
There is that piece of empathy and feeling and protection that he clearly had, at least a little bit, for her. I was actually kind of curious of why the relationships are ending. And I think a lot about the fact of his socialization and his, maybe a big piece of him is like, I have a child now and I have a girlfriend and I have been married and this type of thing. And so, I don't know. I do see him again. It's that piece in you or not in you, but in them that says, this isn't enough. Like, I want to have a normal life. I'm trying to have a normal life, but this
Yeah,
constant thought of murder, right? This constant thought of going and sexual assaulting or doing something to somebody just is living wildly inside me.
yeah, and is that maybe why they broke up? I mean, was he
See?
still going out and doing this? If
Mm-hmm.
he did it in the military, right,
Yep.
on
That's
his
right.
days off or his leave, was he going out on nights or weekends? Was he actually satisfying those urges? And this is going to come up later on as we see him traveling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other law enforcement officials said he's traveling to murder.
That's
I
right.
don't know. Was he traveling to have an affair? Was he traveling to sexually assault people? Was he traveling to commit crimes and gain some more money that gave him more freedom to travel and commit more crimes? So, see, I don't think you
I
can just
see.
automatically jump to conclusions like that.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So let's get into his crimes from just a profiling perspective. Is Israel Keys starting to become more organized? Are we seeing disorganized? We know he killed from 2001 to 2012, or at least that's what they think the timeline is of his victims. No victim profile, random, opportunistic. So what do we really know about that?
Yeah, that really throws a wrench in it. Anytime we have this travel involved and we have very random crimes, we're actually going to see that in a couple other killers that we're going to feature this year in season 3. Very opportunistic. And so it's very. It's much more difficult for law enforcement when they're not giving us some type of pattern, some type of predictability. We know he's motivated by adrenaline and control. He said he was like an addict. So when people say things like that, it goes back to the point you just made during the 6-year period. Was he settling down and becoming better, more paternalistic, more loving? Or was he really an addict and still going out and committing these crimes?
Yeah.
See what I
Yeah.
mean? So just because we can't tie him to specific crimes during that time doesn't mean that he didn't do it. Now, speaking of crimes, we do know that he funded his travel through his construction company. He said he only burglarized like less than a dozen victims, but we know it was more like 20 or 30. We also know that he was committing bank robberies at this time, at least 2 of them that we're aware of. One in New York, where he had some property, and one down in Texas, not very far from, where the Corsicana Command Center is, where Lauren's based right now. There were other crimes that were precursors to his serial killing spree, if you want to call it that. And it was arson. And that is kind of a continuation of the starting fires, setting fires as a young person. And that he did allude to that he did international travel, and there might be some foreign victims from Canada to Mexico and even down to Belize, which wouldn't be out of the realm if he said, I've raped people in Israel and, other places when I was in the military. He did say that he idolized killers like Ted Bundy. So that certainly is another thing. But interesting, and we see this a lot when we go in and finally capture a killer. Not only do we find usually newspaper clippings or accounts of the crimes, documentation of the crimes, souvenirs, a lot of times we find other books on serial killers or on law enforcement. And he said to authorities he actually read several of these books to avoid forming any pattern, to avoid being caught. So here we have a random opportunistic killer, but that has studied crimes and that has worked in travel and burglary and robbery to finance his travel, to cover his tracks, to kill victims.
That's interesting because we had talked earlier about what is his intelligence level or what is his level of, smarts when it comes to some of this. Well, he's reading books about how to evade the FBI. He's traveling. And whether, like you said, it's because he was traveling to commit murder, if he was just traveling. But we're talking about stalking. We're talking about bank robberies. We're talking about burglaries. I mean, this guy's kind of all over the place with some
Yeah.
of these things.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to that opportunistic, right? His
Yeah.
personality is kind of random, opportunistic. Hey, if I'm in this place and I see this, I'm going to take it. They're not home. I'm going to break into the house. I'm doing construction in house A. I see nobody's in house B. I'm going to burglarize it, sell it, gain money that way.
Yeah.
He was considered by authorities highly elusive. He'd fly into a city, rent a car, and then he may drive hundreds of miles searching for a victim and
Yeah.
then return home to Alaska, leaving very few traces behind. The other things we know that he did that leads us to believe that he's organized, at least in his murders, is when he would go on his murder trips, he'd turn off his mobile phone and he paid for all items in cash so there'd be no credit card receipts. And we find out later on that he did use what he called a kill kit or a murder kit, and we've seen this with other killers, that he would hide in certain specific locations in the thought of coming back weeks, months, or years later, killing somebody in the area and having his kill kit already prepared for him.
Oh
So
my gosh.
we do see significant planning,
Yeah.
at least pre-planning of some of these crimes.
Okay, so turning the mobile phone off, paying for the items in cash, again, reading the books about the FBI, having murder kits placed around areas you're going to, that is way pre-planning. And it's the I don't know, John, is it the excitement of using the kit, having it available to you? It's a very strange thing. I don't know.
Well, I think
me.
just putting it together,
Yeah.
I think it's like any other hobby. I hate to compare it to a hobby, but when you're planning for a trip, right, you're kind of get excited when you're packing your bag.
That's right.
So can you imagine the excitement he has of putting together a murder kit, flying it across the country or putting it together and burying it or hiding it and knowing that it's there and it's pre-staged there. And the murder kit may include things like weapons, knives, guns. It could include things like things to clean up the crime, rags, solvents. It could include things like something you're going to use in the commission of the crime, handcuffs, duct tape, right? Zip ties. All those things can go into a murder kit. And we've seen many, many serial killers. Remember married murderers? They did the same thing. They carried their kill kit in the van. They'd kidnap the young kids and they'd have everything right there for them. So we've seen this over and over again. But to me, it's got to be the thrill of getting it together, planning it, hiding it, burying it, and knowing exactly where it is and nobody else knows, so that when you're back there or you're in that area and the opportunity strikes, you can grab it.
Yeah, that was a great analogy about getting excited about packing your suitcase and traveling. I can absolutely 100% see that, and especially if you're burying it. It's like his treasure almost, right? Like buried treasure waiting for you. Okay, so we know.
The buried treasure that he has. And see, that's the thing that I think people kind of went a little crazy on this story. We're going to talk about it later. He confessed to a whole bunch of murders, but we only found 2 kill kits. So
interesting.
Was he doing a lot of this preparation for himself? And then when he got caught, wanted to take credit for a lot of other things? We'll talk about that in just a minute. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands. And it's fitting to share with you what I'm enjoying today and have been enjoying throughout the show. It's a glass of our True Crime red wine blend. Now, it's garnered a host of awards, recently named one of the top Texas wines, and it's a blend of our Primitivo and Graciano red wine. It's a dry red wine, and it pairs great. I had it last night with some fajitas. I've also had it, though, with pasta. So enjoy a glass of our true crime branded red blend from Casaro Winery. As always, you can purchase all of our wines at casarowines.com. CASSARO wines.com. Salute.
Okay, John, so let's talk about his first known victims. Keyes confessed to murdering 49-year-old William Bill Scott Currier and 55-year-old Lorraine Simone Currier of Essex, Vermont. Keyes says he breaks into the home on the night of June 8th, 2011, which, by the way, is the same year that him and Kimberly cut off their relationship. He says he tied them both up before driving them to an abandoned farmhouse where he shot Bill, then sexually assaults and strangles Lorraine. Their bodies actually have never been found, John. So the only thing in this, I found this very interesting, that is tying him, and what police believe tie him to this, besides his confession, is his kill kit. He had a kill kit nearby the house of where this crime took place.
Yeah, which he recovered and used during the crime at the murders. What I found interesting is you've got the kill kit, which shows pre-planning preparation. We talked about that.
Uh-huh.
But he knows where to take them. He kidnaps them, he ties them up, and he doesn't want to kill them in their house for whatever reason. He takes them to an abandoned farmhouse. That means he's already scoped out this area, right?
That's right.
I mean, I'm sorry. I don't know which houses around me are abandoned. So he's already scoped out this area. Now, remember, this is in Vermont. Where's he living? Alaska. You're talking about all the way across the country. So he's left Alaska, traveled all the way across the country, knows he has a kill kit buried by, comes upon this couple, and kidnaps them and takes them to an abandoned house, which shows me very, very much pre-planning preparation.
Well, I found this also interesting, not only the fact you're going from Alaska to Vermont, but we know he is actually admitted to stalking couples, right? And so I don't think, right, we've talked about coincidences, that you just happen to stumble upon these two and happen to stumble upon this house and know where there's an abandoned farmhouse and you just happen to have a kill kit nearby. So is he choosing locations, like you said, Alaska to Vermont? I mean, what is strange? Are these just random? Did he ever talk about this to police?
Well, we know he has property in New York. And so New York and Vermont are very close, so that's not a stretch at all. Matter of fact, he even said after the murder, he moved the kill kit to New York. So to me, that kind of says, all right, I've used it once. It was a success. It worked. I'm going to move it somewhere else. We know that later on he also robs a bank in New York. So there is that kind of Northeast connection that I'm seeing, as well as connections that he's got in Washington, as well as connections in Alaska. So geographically, he's not all over the place like some truck driver wandering the country like we've seen. He's pretty specific about where he's placing these kits and I think where he wants to do these crimes. The other interesting thing I saw is the sexual assault of Lorraine.
Okay.
It's a pattern. He sexually assaulted that young teenager, right? He said he sexually assaulted people when he was in the military. He hinted to the fact that he sexually assaulted people when he was traveling internationally. And now we see him sexually assaulting one of his victims. So, you know, that's kind of what I'm looking at here is what is the real motive behind this?
Mhm.
Are they random? Are they opportunistic? Is it, I'm going to plant my kill kit here and I'm going to drive around and I'm going to search and I'm going to look for victims? That very well could be the case, right? Ed
Right.
Kemper used to drive around the Berkeley campus and the area looking for victims, right?
Mhm.
We've seen that. My serial killer would drive the prostitute areas night after night after night looking for victims. So we've seen that over and over. Jefferson go truck stop to truck stop looking for victims. So yeah, I think he's planning these kill kits. I think he knows his general area of attack, where his comfort zone is. And in this case, he killed a 49-year-old and 55-year-old.
Well, let's talk about the kill kits a little bit because we know that the FBI stated that they recovered two, one in Alaska and one in New York. But
And the one in New York is the one that he moved from the
yeah, the one,
Vermont. Yep.
right.
Yeah.
But he's confessed to so many other murders, but they've only been able to find a couple of the kill kits. So does that kind of persuade what you said at the beginning of him being a serial killer, or was this just random? I kind of want to know what you think about these kill kits.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up in the end, kind of give you a summary of my thoughts, but it was a red flag when I noticed that even the FBI in some of their appeals, hey, if you find anything, we're looking for more. Only two were found. So he's confessing to all these other crimes. And to me, I'm getting flashbacks of Henry Lee Lucas confessing to crimes that he didn't commit. And that's almost a sin in the criminal category, right? Don't confess to something you didn't commit. But the evidence of the kits, okay, I can take. We didn't find them, right? They were hidden. Even all these years later, nobody else has stumbled upon them. I could take some degree of that. When we start to verify some of the other victims, though, we have real problems with that. And so now I start going back to the totality, right? Now I start going back to, when you put everything together, does it make sense? But for the kill kits, like I said, we know that he buried money, buried guns, buried implements so he could commit his crimes, tools, things like that. He said he committed a dozen murders. Not sure that was actually the case.
All right, John. So we talk about planning, organization of these perpetrators, and we know that Israel Keys planned and well organized his attacks. So he would fly to cities, he would rent cars, he would drive hundreds, thousands of miles to these locations. He used cash, didn't want to leave any credit card receipts behind. He removed phone batteries so he could not be located, targeted isolated spots like parks and trails and cemeteries. And we know part of the MO was strangulation. But that's not all he did. He used guns, blunt force trauma. So sexual assaults. We talked about this earlier, and I did want to point out, when we did our last couple of episodes, we talked about torture a lot, right? Seeing someone be tortured, the high you're getting of seeing someone in pain. Well, his, I think, was leading with sexual assaults. I feel like we kind of see this pattern with him, that this is his main motive, in my opinion, is getting the power and the assault over the victim. He would pose bodies, demanded ransom post-mortem. So what are we kind of seeing with what we know about him now?
I think you're hitting on the sexual assault angle. That's why I'm not convinced he did as many murders as he said. I'm not convinced that travel when he was with his girlfriend, when he was in the military, after his girlfriend, wasn't related to sexual assaults, right?
Yeah,
and he wasn't proud of it or happy of it and didn't want to get caught for it. We saw that with the first crime, the sexual assault of the teenager. So to me, he's a burglar, he's a robber. He likes the sexual part of this. And I'm just not convinced that this planning, preparation, travel, it could have been to commit murder, but I think there's a bunch more sexual assaults in there than we're ever going to know about.
I agree with you on that. And then let's talk about the kill kits again, just briefly. So the kits were buried, according to him, right? He had a lot more kill kits than what they found. He actually said not only Vermont, New York, Alaska, Washington, Wyoming, zip ties. He would bury this stuff, ammo, guns, shovels, Drano. I mean, is he naming
Everything
these
you need.
things? I mean, did
Right?
they find all this, or is he just saying these are the things that he buried?
Yeah, no, and they found that in the kill kits, right?
Okay,
The
they did
two
find
that were
okay.
recovered, they found it. There was no reason really to lie about what was in the kill kit. It was simply what my question is the number of kill kits and the number of actual murders. But the kill kit was a pretty standard serial killer kill kit, right?
Yeah.
Knives, guns, ammo, zip ties to restrain people. Other killers use handcuffs. Drano, that can be used as torture, and it can be used to clean up. Shovel can be used to incapacitate somebody and to bury them. A lot of times we see duct tape. So, I mean, there's probably a dozen or so items that if you wanted to put a kill kit together, I could probably name it right off the top of my head, and there you go. And he had a pretty standard kill kit that he did assemble. Yep.
So we know that the murders started really post-discharge from the military 2001, and then it ends in 2012 with the Koenig murder. But there was a possible victim, a prostitute, white female, 48 years old, Deborah Feldman. She was last seen April 8th of 2009 in Hackensack, New Jersey by a friend, and she never returned home after a date. So Keyes was suspected of killing her and burying her near Tupper Lake, New York. But what is the link to him and to her?
I included this, Brandy, because this is one that I do believe that he did. Again, does this qualify him as a serial killer? Now with the body count, we see that. We see a cooling off period because it was 2 years before the couple that he murdered. But to me, the things that stuck out is that he was in that area at that time in 2009 traveling. He buried her near Tupper Lake, New York, which is close to where he had property, and it's where he robbed a bank. So there's a really, really strong connection there. But the thing that kind of pushed me over on, I really do think of all the people that he mentioned, and he could have killed them all, right? I'm not saying he didn't. He could have killed them all. But the other thing that really ties him to this crime is that when police checked his computer, they found he had done multiple searches of her missing person report. And that was shortly before his arrest. So was he trying to figure out, did they tie me to this? Is there more information? Is there something I need to know about? But I just, that is too strong of a piece of evidence, going into somebody's personal computer, looking at their searches, and discovering that they're searching specifically for a missing person that was found buried in a community that we know you've been to, that you have property close to, and that you actually robbed a bank in. So, when we look at everything all together, I'm going to lump this homicide into his string of homicides that we do know about.
I would agree with you on that. And I think that's his comfort zone. I think about the comfort zones we've talked about and where they feel comfortable committing crimes. And near his properties seems to be one of his comfort zones. I don't know if it's because he can go back there when he's finished and it's a place for him to hide or to decompress or whatever they do. But I would agree with you that we always say there's no coincidences in life, so this is not one of them either. But John, there were 7 other potential victims. We have an unidentified victim in Washington State in 2001. Keyes had claimed to have buried or submerged a victim in the lake near Nia Bay, Washington, shortly after his discharge from the Army. We also have another unidentified couple in Washington State in between 2001 and 2005. Keyes confessed to this double homicide in Washington, stating that he had killed the man with a shovel and strangled the woman and buried both of them. And then we've got 2 other victims in Washington State between 2005 and 2006, where he mentioned the 2 separate murders during this period, with one body potentially being disposed in Lake Crescent, Washington. And then we've got a total of 2 or 3 more additional. So now we've got 11. So what are your thoughts around these that I mentioned?
Well, as you start to pick apart each one of them, you start to see some cracks in the confession or cracks in the stories. First of all, none of these people were recovered.
Okay.
We don't have bodies. Okay.
Okay.
Now, all right. We don't always recover every victim. I can live with that. But in his confessions, he seemed to be confused about what he did. And that's not normal, right?
Right.
Most of these killers relive the murder over and over and over, and they know everything. And I kind of go to Samuel Little and his photographic memory, right? Now, he is an outlier because he literally could draw a picture of 100 victims in their faces, right? And be perfect in it. But killer after killer after killer will tell us, I did this and it was this minute and this time, and then I did this and then I did this, because they relive it over and over and over to get to experience it again. In some of his confessions, they weren't like that. They were vague. Well, I think I buried him, but I could have submerged him in the lake. That's totally different. Yeah. Did you take a shovel and dig a hole and bury somebody, or did you go rent a boat and drive out into a lake, tie him up with chains or cement, and throw him in the lake? They're 2 totally different forms of body disposal. And I just found that when you're looking at some of these confessions, and again, I just go back to this whole Henry Lee Lucas thing and the way that they're questioned and the people that question him, and are the questions leading? And I'm not saying that he didn't. There are some, authorities across the country that say, hey, we are totally convinced he's got 7 victims, or we're totally convinced he's got 11. I'm more in the 4 category, and I'm more in the, I'm just not sure about some of these victims. They were in his comfort zone if they occurred in Washington State. We certainly know that.
I do find it interesting he names the ones all in Washington State, which is a little strange, to me. You would think they would be more all over, spread out based on his travel and driving hundreds and thousands of miles. Something else that stuck out was no names ever given. I also wonder, did police ever find out there were missing persons in these areas at the time?
I think they tried tracking it back, but as far as I know, they never did match up. So you've got unidentified victims, no bodies recovered, so no verification of the deceased. We don't, as far as I know, have missing persons reports tied specifically to incidents at dates and times around what he's telling us, because, okay, we didn't find the bodies, but we knew mom and dad turned up missing, right?
Yeah.
That type thing. So there's just too many question marks, and there's just too many serial killers that don't leave those question marks.
Yeah, absolutely.
They know every last intimate detail about the crime, even if they committed dozens or scores of them, because that becomes part of them.
Yeah.
Right?
And I would agree with his organization of reading the books, not turning off the phone, carrying cash, that he just wouldn't all of a sudden forget some of these really important details or get them mixed up or confused.
Brandy, as you can see, I've got one of our True Crime and Wine logoed hoodies on. Weather was going to get a little cooler this weekend. I went on Shop True Crime. That's our website for all of our logoed items for True Crime and Wine. Shop True Crime. I went on Shop True Crime and I said, I need a hoodie. They're 25% off this month, and it's a little bit cooler. I'm getting a hoodie. I can't believe it came. It's great. It looks great. It's soft. So if you need a hoodie or any other of our True Crime and Wine paraphernalia or logoed items like our True Crime and wine glasses, go to shoptruecrime.com. Shoptruecrime.com and get your True Crime and Wine logoed items.
This is kind of a rare case. Again, you kind of started out saying you're not sure with your profiling experience if you feel like Israel Keys was actually a serial killer. But there's no victim profile when we're talking about Israel Keys. So from a profiling perspective, what are you picking up?
Well, again, we don't always have a victim profile. You know, we might have a profile on the behavior and the characteristics of the killer. We might have a geographic profile. We've got some of that in this case, but it is more an exception than a rule that it is totally random, totally opportunistic, and no specific profile, male, female, black, white, tall, skinny, short, fat. I mean, nothing that we see here. Habits, similar habits. You've got everything from a married couple to a prostitute. You've got a young teenager. Friends and family, certainly we don't know about that because we don't see any tie-in here. They're happening in different places around the country. I don't see any occupational tie-ins unless it was an occupational tie-in that as a constructor, a contractor, he was working in that area at that time. So I from a victimology standpoint, we do see some geographic profiling, some characteristic profiling, certainly his background. You and I talked about it, but from a victim, it does appear very random, very opportunistic, and very spontaneous.
So when you're talking about the victimology, the MO, the body disposal, I mean, is this random? Is he organized when it comes to this piece of it? I mean, we know
he doesn't even know.
Yeah,
on these other victims, what is his body disposal? I mean, we know that he took the one couple that we're pretty sure that he and he alone killed, took him to the abandoned farmhouse, strangled him, raped the woman, killed him. Right? We know that. We probably feel fairly good, at least about the prostitute because of him searching. He can't remember. Did I bury him? Did I throw him in a lake? Oh, I think I took a boat out and put this person in a lake. So on one hand, like you're saying, we have this very, very organized killer. And yet on the other hand, he can't remember his crimes. I just go back to, is he organized because he's covering something else up? Is he covering up other robberies? Is he covering up other I think other rapes or sexual assaults? I think he doesn't feel good about it. I think maybe he feels guilty or bad because he's got a young daughter and he's got to travel hundreds or thousands of miles to pick up prostitutes or to rape women. That's kind of how I see this coming together.
So we know there's really no pattern again with the victimology. He chooses victims at random. His MO, strangles, rapes. Again, I think it's the sexual assault that he leads with that kind of fuels the fire in him. Said he studied serial killers, learned how to avoid detection, which he seems very organized at doing, but then he would just dump or bury in remote areas. So he says, we don't really know, right?
Well, he'd go to those remote areas. We do know that.
Mm-hmm.
He did go to like trailheads of parks and hiking trails. He did spend time in remote areas. His kill kits were buried in remote areas. So from a geographic profiling standpoint, He sought out those areas. He obviously knew where that abandoned farmhouse was. You don't
Yes.
go in and kidnap a couple and go, do y'all know anywhere where I can take you to rape you and murder you?
Yeah.
No, he specifically took him to that location. So again, even though the victimology is very random, and his MO isn't very consistent either, let me tell you, there's a lot of planning and preparation of his travel. So was he planning and preparing for other crimes? Did he want to murder? That's why he buried the kill kit, and we simply don't know about him. Or was he covering up other crimes that we don't know about?
Dismemberment is mentioned in some of when we're talking about Israel Keys. Did he say he dismembered? Did they find dismemberment? Why does that word come
Yeah,
up?
he said that he did dismember one of the victims that he threw in a lake in Alaska,
Mhm.
that he submerged. That remember the Drano we talked about that can be
Mhm.
used as a cleaning agent. We've seen Drano poured down victims' throats. We've seen serial killers do that. He said he would coat them for decomposition,
Mm.
so that their bodies couldn't be recovered. And as we know, many of the victims he claimed we never did recover their bodies. So again,
Yeah.
this is a really hard case to unravel. He is, excuse me, in remote areas. We know that.
Yeah.
He does have kill kits. He is leaving the victims in remote areas. There's a ton of planning, but there's so much unknown. And I'm sorry, when you don't even know the name of the victim,
I know.
right? And you
Yeah.
don't know what you did with them or how you disposed of them. And we know killers will tell us, "Oh, I picked up prostitutes and killed them." What was her name? Well, I didn't know her name. I didn't ask her. What did you call her? Anything? Oh, I called her Jane. Almost all of them have a nickname or something they refer to the victim
Mm.
to, whether they know their real legal name or not. In most cases, they don't. This guy can't tell us names, can't tell us locations, can't tell us anything.
Okay, so we know that we talked about his organization in some pieces of his crimes. He nomadic lust killer is a great word for him, right? He's roaming and killing, I guess. He says he is. We don't fully know if that is always the case. You mentioned adrenaline earlier, control, animal torture. I mean, psychological traits. I felt like he kind of dealt with this yin and yang of like good and evil.
Yeah.
Studied killers to refine his methods, and I don't know, from a profiling. I know we've talked a lot about this with the profiling and the geographic, but
And the
why do you
journal, remember
oh, the journal. Yeah, so why
the
do you
Bible
think people
verses
are
and the,
so fascinated with Israel Keys?
well,
Before we
because we
kind of
don't,
talk about his arrest, why Israel Keys?
well, because we don't know. We don't know
Mm,
exactly what he did. And the kill kits are the fascinating aspect of this. Can
okay.
you pre-plan murders all over the country, plant kill kits that you're going to use in months or years in the future? And what could be your body count? So I think, yeah, I think that's some fascination with it. When he was arrested, he drew 11 skulls in his cell. Well,
Mm,
if you look at the 7 possible victims, right,
mhm,
that we
mhm,
talked about, we don't know their names, we don't know where they're buried, we don't know anything about them, just that he said he killed them.
okay.
And you add the 3 we know about and the one that I discussed that I really believe he's, you know,
Responsible for. Yeah.
responsible for because he was searching her on the computer. 11 and 4, 7 and 4 is 11. So that is a pretty strong indicator in his
Interesting.
mind that he's got 11 notches on his gun, or in his case, 11 skulls on his cell wall.
John, did the skulls look different? Did they look the same? Did they have representation of
Yeah,
uh,
no, they didn't look like male, female, big,
okay,
little. I think they were just pretty much skulls on the wall. But
interesting.
could that have been Brandy? law enforcement goes in to talk to him. Did you do this? Yes, I did it. I don't know their name. I don't know where they're buried. I don't remember exactly how I disposed of them, but yes, I did it. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to clear a case. Does he now go back to his cell and draw a skull? Is he see what I mean? That's why it's fascinating. Is he doing this to try to tell law enforcement, I'm telling you I got 11 victims. But then on one hand, he's confessing to 40. And on the other hand, we can't tie him really to more than 3, at the most 4. So is he going back and drawing these skulls like, I tricked him again?
And sending them on sort of a goose chase,
exactly.
Right? Or what are they? Yeah, like
I mean, and again, I hate bringing this up, but I go back to Henry Lee Lucas, and he would confess to almost everything. You'd go in there and say, "Were you in this place at this time? And did you use this gun to kill this person?" Yep, I did it. Okay, clear the case.
Oh my gosh!
So I think that's why this case is really fascinating. And he did so much to avoid detection. I just don't know what he was trying to avoid. Right?
Interesting. Yeah, and I think, and again, it's like, how much time, or is it like you're just sending police to go investigate something you actually didn't even do? Maybe those people don't even exist. Maybe he actually just said it because he's familiar with the lakes or familiar with the area, and so it's easy for him to make this stuff up and kind of gets entertainment.
And we had that in one of our last episodes, right, Brandy? We had a killer that got mad because Rodney Alcala claimed his victim.
That's right.
They get mad. Hey, that's not his victim. That is my victim. And I'll come forward and tell you about it and prove it, because he didn't want another killer taking claim for it. So is this the case here? Is Keyes claiming victims that he never did kill, or is it all made up? Now, from a geographic profiling standpoint, a little more concrete. We do know he traveled the country. We do know he traveled internationally, which matches with him confessing to some things. We know he preferred Washington State and New York, and he had property in both. We know that he sought out his victims in remote areas. We know that he robbed banks in at least 2 states, so he has a funding mechanism, right? So we know he's a contractor. We know he's a bank robber. We know he's a burglar. So we know he's getting money. That's how he's paying for, rent-a-cars and airplanes and hotels and everything. But this is kind of going to be his downfall, because he was not using credit cards. He was paying cash. He was turning off his phone. He was taking the batteries out of his phone. But then at some point, he started using a credit card from a victim, and he knew not to do it, but he slipped up.
And well, this is the beginning of the end for him. So his last confirmed victim, we know, is 18-year-old Samantha Tesla Koenig, a coffee booth employee in Anchorage, Alaska. He's kidnaps her from her workplace on February 1st of 2012. Like you said, took her debit card and other property, then raped and sodomized her before strangling her to death with a rope, John.
All right, so what did you just describe, Brandy? The murder in detail.
Yeah,
what about those other 7? Now, you remember this one?
I know.
And you remember the couple, but you don't remember 7 others? Again, that's where these red flags come in for me. He can't even articulate what he did with the body, and he's telling us, oh, in this case, I did pick her up from a coffee booth, so she wasn't in a remote area. I kidnapped her. I took her to a remote area. I raped her, and I strangled her with a rope. We then know he did take her body out to a lake and submerge her body. All of a sudden, he remembers these details and nothing else.
Yeah. He's, well, and John, also what's interesting is There's been a few cases that I've covered of taking someone from their workplace, gas stations, women working in different places, and it's always sexually motivated.
Yep.
Typically. And so this is why, again, tying back to, we know he sexually assaults her and, leaves her body. He left her body in a shed in his backyard and then goes to New Orleans. And then he goes on a cruise to the Gulf of Mexico.
With his family.
Yeah. Gosh, this guy. But then he removes her body from the shed, applies makeup to the corpse's face, sewed her eyes open with fishing line. He then takes a picture of a 4-day-old issue of the Anchorage Daily News alongside her body that he had posed, John, to basically see that she was still alive.
And
what did I just say?
And
that's just crazy.
And he had sex with her after she was dead for 2 weeks. So he put makeup on her. He sewed her eyes open and put her by the newspaper, trying to say, "Oh, she's alive," and he demands ransom. Some of it, what was paid into account. Well, how does he got access to the account? He took her debit card. Right? He then gets rid of the body, dumps her in the lake north of Anchorage, and her body was recovered. So again, unlike the other 7 crimes, he could tell us specifically what he did, when he did it, how he was going to get a ransom, how he was going to make money from it. I mean, he knows every detail of this crime, and I think you've been on it the entire show, Brandy. Great job. The sexual gratification that he's getting, that's what's driving these crimes. That's also why I'm not convinced that all of these trips, all these travel is not for sexual pleasure instead of murder. He just claimed a bunch of murders. But we've actually got a body here now.
Well, and also I feel like he has really jumped the lake here from what he was doing to doing this. I mean, having, sex after someone has been dead for 2 weeks, applying makeup to the corpse, taking picture and posing it. I mean, I feel like this is on another level. Thankfully, he is arrested after this, so he can't do this to anyone else. But John, not only is this very detailed, but it's different. At least it's different than what we know of what he has actually done. I mean, my God, what if he's been doing this the entire time across the country?
Well, and so the necrophilia is different, but certainly the sexual assault's not. He started with the teenager. He sexually assaulted Lorraine. We assume he sexually assaulted the prostitute. So that is kind of the common theme. He said himself he sexually assaulted people in the military and on international travel. That may be the key. But taking it to another level, the whole ransom, and then, we don't know if he had sex with the other bodies afterwards. He could have, but he certainly described this. And of course, he was so careful about not taking his credit cards, but for some reason, I don't know what he was thinking, but again, that's great for us in law enforcement. He takes her debit card, he demands ransom be placed in that account, and then he uses it. Well, law enforcement tracks the debit card, right?
Yeah.
They put out a flyer and distribute it. Hey, be aware this is in the car he's in. They know where he is because they're tracking him and they're tracking the debit card. They're tracking the withdrawals. And on March 13th, 2012, down in Lufkin, Texas, long way from Anchorage where he committed the murder, Texas DPS and Texas Rangers swooped in, found him in the vehicle, arrested him, searched his vehicle, found Koenig's ATM card and her cell phone, as well as money that was stained from a dye pack from a robbery that he had committed in Azle, Texas. So he was done at that point, right?
Yeah.
You've got a dead woman's credit card. You've got a dead woman's cell phone. You've got a dye pack of money that you can tie back to a bank robbery. He's going to jail. He's not getting out. So now he's extradited back to Alaska, and that's where we see all these confessions start to come out. right?
Okay.
And initially he's charged with fraud for using the Koning's bank account, but he confesses to the murder and tells us in detail exactly what happened. And so again, when you start looking at the confessions, very, very detailed account about the
Hmm.
couple in Vermont, very detailed account about Koning in Alaska, not so much about the prostitute in New Jersey, but you have physical evidence, hard evidence from his computer that he was searching her, right? Very, very random that he was searching her. And the other ones, I don't know their name. I
Yep.
really don't know where they are. Authorities looked for bodies, couldn't find bodies, couldn't really tie him to it, but there's enough. They indict him and they schedule his trial for March of 2013. And so this is where I kind of really remember that teenager a long time ago. He said he
Hmm.
assaulted her and released her alive. She was never found or discovered, uh, but it never filed a criminal report. But we're pretty sure that occurred. In 21, he said he killed somebody, but we don't know who it is or where they are. He said he was
Hmm.
in Washington. He also said he killed a couple in a double homicide. He said he buried them, but we don't know where we are, and there is no names. There's not a name in 2006 when he said he murdered somebody else in Washington and dumped him in a lake. But again, no body, no name. In another murder, he said he can't remember. I buried him or I submerged him and I don't know a name. So we just have all of these confessions. And I literally have got pages here. I'm not even going to go into it of confessions um, that I just don't know when you have
Yeah.
so few names and so few bodies. It's really, really difficult. Um, what we do know, what we know for sure is the bank robbery in New York, the murder of Bill and Lorraine Courier. We know that, and we recovered a kill kit. The murder of Samantha Koenig. We know that. Recovered the body, identified her. He had her credit cards. He had her phone. We know that he set fire to a home in Alito, Texas, right before he robbed a bank in Texas. So those are the crimes that we know about. And that's there's just too many unknowns for me, right?
Right.
Too many unknowns in here for me to say you gave 40 hours of confessions, you confessed to all these crimes, and you don't know details. You know, you
Well,
don't
and I
know
also,
details.
well, I think he was out of money, John. I think that's why he used the debit card. I think he was in the ransom. I think he needed money into the account to have
I
access to
agree.
funds, which is
Did he
probably desperation,
did
right?
he
He
did
was
he
out of
spend
money.
too much on that cruise?
Yeah, right.
I
Oh, yeah.
I, I
I
mean,
mean, who knows? I don't know. I
No,
mean,
I think he was out of money. I think it was
I think he's out of money.
desperation, like you said. Why would he all of a
Hmm.
sudden demand a ransom from the dead person's family
Yeah.
and then it tie him back to these credit cards? Um, was there, guilt or remorse? I think there was remorse that he got caught.
Hmm.
He tried to escape once, and U.S. Marshals tased him.
Mm.
So he did try to get away. I think he might have regretted getting caught. I don't know if they ever regret the murder, especially when it's murder and necrophilia and
Hmm.
everything else he did. So I think, that's questionable. But in my analysis, just to try to sum it all up,
Yeah.
there were so many murders that were unaccounted for because there were no identified victims and no bodies.
Okay.
But when you do the math of the ones that authorities think they can best tie him to, it comes to 11, and there were 11 skulls on his cell. But then again, did he draw them as like notches in his belt? Like, I tricked him again. Some of the confessions just couldn't be verified. Others were disproven. Matter of fact, one thing that he confessed to, another individual was arrested and convicted for it, and there was evidence of it. He said, so some are totally disproven, right? It's not just, we don't know the name, we don't have the victim. In one of the cases, I think it was a white male in his 50s, he said he killed him, and evidence proved that another guy killed him, and another guy was sent to prison. He confessed to all these kill kits. Could they still be out there? 100%. 100% they could still be out there. But I could tell you, the FBI only recovered the two, the one in Alaska with Koning and the one that he used in the Courier attack, and that was near Tupper Lake in New York, right? We do know for sure 100% he made multiple trips all over the country. He flew, he rented cars, he drove. We know that. But I guess I'm sitting here, Brandy, going, was it all for murder? Was it for sex? Was it for prostitutes? Was he having affairs? Was he just going and raping women? So to me, when I added up, I just am not convinced that his tally is more than four being the couple, and Samantha in Alaska, and the prostitute in New Jersey. I'm not so sure. Does that technically qualify him? The crimes were so different. I'm not sure, but the sexual assault was a component of each one. Strangulation was. Body disposal was different. Geography was different. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of conflicted. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that, I think if they've already disproven some of the things that he's admitted to, I think there's more things to be disproven. So, I don't think it just stops there. I think there are probably a lot of things. I think he's taking them on a little bit of a goose chase. I think that it's time and resources. I think he's a pretty smart guy. I don't think he's an idiot. I think he,
do you think he wanted to be famous?
I think he maybe wanted to know, well, by the way, he dies of suicide, right? So I'm going to just reference there that I think he wanted to continuously have his name in the limelight of sorts, and for then FBI police to continue to look for these victims that he says that he has. And what is happening now, John? People know the name Israel Keys, and I think he's probably doing exactly what he wanted.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think there may be, once he was arrested, he knew he was caught red-handed. He knew he was never going to get out, right?
Right.
So he was going to go to jail for life. I think at that point, when investigators questioned him about different crimes, he just admitted to them, thinking, well, the more I admit to, the more famous I'm going to be. Quite frankly, if he had never said anything about any other murders, and he had only been tied to those three, would anybody even remember him? Would anybody even know his name? And I think he read enough books and studied serial killers enough that he knew he was going to disappear into obscurity. And like you said, on December 1st, 2012, somehow he got a hold of a razor. Even though he wasn't supposed to have one, his shaving was supposed to have been done with an electric razor. He got hold of a razor, and the next day he slit his wrist and strangled himself. He was making sure he was going to die with a rolled up bed sheet. He did write a suicide note, but Brandy, no details of the crimes. None. You think he would have got right? If he did those crimes, wouldn't his last words have been, I can prove it, and here's where the bodies are? But no details of the crimes at all, and he just left us with those drawings of the 11 skulls on his cell wall to lead us to believe, maybe, I think, that he was much bigger of a deal than he really was. but we're talking about him here today. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners, follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. You can find it there. Everything about the podcast, our schedule, all of the stuff we're doing, some behind the scene photographs that we took today. You can order your wine at casarowine.com and get the wine and join Brandy and I as we profile unique serial killers from around the country and around the world. Now, I think that wraps up our business for today. And of course, I want to thank Brandy Diamond for a great job joining me today, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center for helping to make this show possible. And I invite you to join us next episode, where we're going to feature a serial killer whose delusions led him to murder nearly a dozen people. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.